I'm sitting now with Katie Mottram and Katie, you're in the UK. Do you want to tell us where you're located?
I am. I'm based in Norwich, in Norfolk, in the east of England.
Okay, great. Now, Katie, I've invited you to come and speak with us because you're very involved with the Spiritual Crisis Network in the whole England territory. So I would love to have you share a little bit about what your work is within that crisis network and also specifically what you're doing within that.
Okay, sure. I'm involved with the Spiritual Crisis Network due to my own personal experiences, and I am a responder for the development group. Just to give a bit of background, the Spiritual Crisis Network was established around 10 years ago by Catherine Lucas, who experienced a spiritual awakening, and wanted to kind of bring the understanding and support for people that felt that they were experiencing similar things into the UK. We're an online support. So we have a website, which is www.spiritualcrisisnetwork.uk. .org.uk, and we have an email system where people can email in for support. We actually receive emails from all over the world, from people who feel that they're in spiritual crisis and maybe have become embroiled in the mental health system, and they feel that their experiences are more of a spiritual awakening that have been misunderstood. So we have a system where we invite people in to train to become responders on the network. The majority of the network, with the development group, have had their own personal experiences. So we do act as kind of peer support. And when somebody emails in, we try to provide validation. Rather than advice, because obviously a spiritual crisis is a very unique individual experience, but there are a lot of sort of shared commonalities. So we try to kind of help someone to interpret their own experience in a way that works for them, to validate it and to try and kind of look at ways to help to support someone through the process. We see it as trauma as a transformative process rather than something that needs to be squashed or repressed through pathologizing the experience or through conventional medication. We do try to work with the system. We're not kind of anti-psychiatry as such, and we try to not get into distinguishing between whether an experience is a spiritual crisis or a mental health problem, because we kind of see them as very much overlapping, and feel that if we distinguish, then that is kind of supporting that mental illness actually does exist, whereas my personal belief is that every kind of experience of mental distress is a spiritual crisis, really. I really love the Indian philosophy and their terminology of mental distress rather than mental illness versus mental peace. So that's kind of what we try to help people to achieve mental peace through their experience.
So Katie, I think we might have just a word together about the idea of spiritual awakening, because that sounds so wonderful. It sounds esoteric, but it sounds like such a wonderful thing, like a flower blossoming. Why would anyone have distress with this kind of an awakening process? And so I know there may be some people listening to this interview who say, well, what's the big deal with spiritual awakening being stressful? I don't understand. Could you say a little bit about that?
If I kind of give a bit of background to myself and my own sort of experiences and conceptual framework of what mental distress kind of was, because I've worked in the mental health system for around 15 years. My own mum was diagnosed with first of all bipolar disorder and then schizoaffective disorder when she had postnatal depression after my birth. And it was interpreted in a very Western kind of reductionist way. She experienced what she perceived as psychic phenomena. She described her experiences as kind of feeling as though she was a healer. She was sectioned, medicated, and I kind of drifted into the mental health system in a way to try and understand her experiences. And I had a very conventional view of trauma, psychosis, mental distress myself. Hadn't heard of the term spiritual awakening until it happened to me. And I feel that as a result of my mum's trauma and also my own repression of, I always felt when I was growing up that there was something more to life, there was something deeper within my soul, and I never really kind of believed in the work that I was doing wholeheartedly. It always felt like there was something missing kind of from my heart and soul. It felt like it was too much of a that psychiatry today kind of sees us as very robotic, unemotional individuals, that we need to repress extreme emotion. And I felt that there was something missing, and I experienced my own sort of few years of trauma. And a couple of years ago, I took up meditation and yoga, and during a meditation, I experienced what I now know as a spiritual awakening, which was a complete expansion of consciousness, which is kind of very ineffable, really. It's beyond logic, beyond words. It was something that was extremely frightening because it really shook the foundations of everything that I'd learnt through my conventional training, everything that I knew as a mental health professional. In the moment, it was March 2012, and I was sitting on my bed having done a meditation, and I felt like suddenly everything in my life made perfect sense up to that moment. That what I'd gone through was helping to bring me to this place. And I knew in that moment that I would either believe in my own logic, my own sort of professional understanding of what was happening to me, and I diagnosed myself with psychosis, delusions of grandiosity, because I felt like I had the meaning of life suddenly. I felt connected to everyone. Things that I kind of felt deep down that I hadn't been able to explain before just made sense. I channeled message from spirit, which was really, really frightening because it was something that I hadn't previously believed in, really logically. I'd kind of shied away from that because of my mum's experiences. I think I'd learnt convention to kind of self-protect. So I'd moved further and further away from my spiritual self. And in this moment, I came out of meditation and I wrote a theory about spiritual crisis that I'd never ever seen before, never read before. And I now know that that was a clairvoyant experience. I channeled that from universal consciousness, spirit, whichever terminology people kind of prefer to use. And I look back and it makes perfect sense that was what my mum was experiencing, and her mum. It's like I'm third generation. And in that moment, I knew that I had the choice to either believe my logical brain and end up in the same situation that my mum had, on medication, sectioned. I was working in the system at the time, so I knew what I shouldn't say because I knew the terminology, and I knew that if I described what I was experiencing with my colleagues or any doctors I knew, that I would be kind of whipped away in the same way that my mum had been. So I tried to stay as quiet as I could, which is difficult for me because I'm quite outspoken. And I went off and researched, and I read about how psychologically spiritual awakening creates an expansion of consciousness. like we tap into our sixth sense, and our very natural spirituality. And that's when I came across books, authors, your website. I went to the Congress on Medicine and Spirituality in London last year and discovered the wonderful work of the Brazilian hospitals and their own totally different conceptual framework around crisis and around mental distress and trauma as being a transformative process that needs to be nurtured and allowed to progress. And so that's what I've kind of managed to achieve myself, and have kept myself well, as opposed to believing and pathologizing myself. And it's been a very difficult, very stressful journey. I've lost friends. I think people are very frightened of the phenomena because it's kind of little known, there's little spoken about within the mainstream, and it's frightening.
Katie, can I introduce you just interrupt you for a moment and ask,
sure,
what is it that helps you maintain your stability? Because this is a very compelling story, and obviously you were quite disturbed at a certain point, meaning not necessarily mentally disturbed, but just upset because you didn't understand what was happening to you, and you didn't have a framework for it. So what helped you?
I was really mentally disturbed. I would describe it as that I'd kind of lost capacity to deal with everyday life. It's very common for people to be unable to work when they experience a spiritual crisis, spiritual awakening. The things that helped me, which is why I'm so involved with the Spiritual Crisis Network, which are the things that we promote, were finding people that had also experienced something similar. So finding a safe group of people where I could express and feel safe to express my experiences without them being judged or being given a label. Grounding was very important. I actually stopped meditating so much because I found that it was really compelling to do that because it was so exciting. I was having wonder. It was. I also diagnosed myself with bipolar at the time because I was having amazing, just blissful experiences during meditation, feeling so connected to nature, seeing energies from trees. And I realised that I needed to kind of calm that practice down because it was becoming more extreme. And I knew that something we talk about in the Spiritual Crisis Network is the experience of shared reality and unshared reality. And when you experience a spiritual awakening, how important it is to kind of keep a foot in both worlds so that you keep yourself grounded, and being in nature helps with that, sort of rooting yourself to the earth, eating really healthily, making sure you get enough sleep, very practical things, and also finding information, researching, getting validation and support for experiences. And also what really helped me actually was speaking to my mum about it and apologising to her for not having believed her for so many years, and sort of playing a big part in getting her sectioned. And that has been amazing for our relationship. And it's she's been mentally unwell and on medication for all of my life, nearly 40 years. And because of sharing our experiences and me validating her, she's now in recovery. She's the most well she's ever been emotionally, and nothing else within her treatment has changed apart from receiving validation and actually learning to believe in herself and love herself. I believe that spiritual development and emotional development are so closely interlinked. And for me, it's been a very transformative journey of learning to like myself rather than feeling insignificant. I felt very, very insignificant when I was working in the system. I didn't train in anything specific because it didn't fit right. It didn't sit right with me. I was witnessing a lot of treatment, sort of giving medication, enforced treatment that it just didn't sit right with me, and so I didn't do that. So I felt very insignificant compared to my colleagues, and now I've kind of learnt to believe in my own voice and believe that I do have something valid to share with the world, and helping create a new paradigm of understanding.
Your story is very, very beautiful. The way you tell it, especially, Katie, I want to thank you for being so open with us, and the heartfulness with which you tell your story is very touching to me.
I think it's my fears of being subsided by my passion to tell the story.
Yeah. Well, I understand you're also in the midst of writing a book that will be published soon about your story. Would you like to say something about that?
I am. I think that's why I'm so able to be so open about my story now, and it's taken a while to get here. But I've seen the amazing support and transformation that it's created with my mum, and so I'm so passionate about spreading this message to try and help other people who may be in the same situation and also suffering. My book is called Mend the Gap, and it's about mending the huge chasm that we have at the moment within Western psychiatry between spiritual experience and medicine. And it's actually with the editors at the moment. So I'm hoping that it will be published by November at the latest.
Wonderful. And will that be available on Amazon.com so that people can purchase it there?
It will indeed.
Okay, so the book is called Mend the Gap.
Mend the Gap.
Okay.
And I will have a website once it's published, but that hasn't gone live yet.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Katie, for joining me today and being part of this course. And I wish you all the best. I wish you every success with your book and also with the wonderful work that you're doing with the Spiritual Crisis Network in the UK, as well as really assisting in starting a whole new kind of paradigm.
Thank you, Emma. I'm really, really honoured to be part of the innovative work that you do.
You're very welcome. Goodbye for now.
Thank you. Bye.